So tonight, there are three of us that are going to facilitate this time. And so I want to say hello to me. I'm Sandy Coelho, and I serve all of you at the Baptist Convention of New England in the area of leadership development. And it's such an awesome journey because we get to do so much. It's not just one area of ministry, but we do kids ministry and compassion ministries and vacation Bible school, and the list goes on. So I'm excited that we get to touch so many ministries at the BCNE. Joining me tonight is Alice McMahon. She's also working at the church growth team at the Baptist Convention of New England. And then our friend who has a passion for safety and security, and that's Ron Mills. And so I always love it when I can have him on because he really does have a passion for this area, safety and security. And you'll see why when it gets to his turn on our screen. So again, glad you're with us.
So you might ask, why should we be concerned about safety and security? Well, I guess the first thing that pops to my mind is because parents are concerned about the safety, healthy and security of their kids when they leave them with us. So what exactly are they concerned about? They're concerned about germs, injuries, abductions, abuse, and violent attacks.
Now, isn't that a pretty hefty list? That's a pretty hefty list of things that our parents are concerned about. And so to start off, we want to really focus for a few minutes on what some of the realities are. And so let me go through some realities about safety and security. And again, you don't have to write these down because we'll include these on our sheet if you want to share them with your leaders. But researchers estimate that 32 million Americans have food allergies, including 5.6 million children under the age of 18. Now think about this. That's one child in every 13, or roughly 2 in every classroom. So about 40% of children with food allergies are allergic to more than one food. And I bet if we polled people on this call, you would say absolutely, because you probably know people that are, that have issues with gluten, people that have issues with celiac disease, and the list goes on, peanuts and, coconut and starches and all of that. So this is a real big issue, and it's been getting, more traction as we go along. So that's one reality that we have to contend with at the church level. Another reality in another area would be injury. And injury is the leading cause of death of children and young adults. According to the CDC, approximately 12,000 children and young adults ages 1 to 19 die from unintentional injuries every year. And I wonder how safe our churches are when it comes to making sure that we have prevented, but we could prevent that in our churches. So another reality is this: 99.8% of the children who go missing do come home. Now that's good. That's really good. And nearly 90% of missing children have simply misunderstood directions or miscommunicated their plans, are lost, or have run away. But 9% are kidnapped by a family member. And that's what the church needs to be concerned about, that bottom number, that 9% of children are kidnapped by a family member. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. Another reality is that 33% of all girls and 16% of all boys will be abused by the age of 18. 93% know their abuser, 34% are family members, 59% are acquaintances, and only 7% are strangers. And then listen to this stat. This is very sad, that less than 10% of abuse is reported to the police. And that's a reality that we have to deal with even at the church level. And then finally, a reality about violent attacks at church. There are actually about 480 incidents of serious violence at places of worship in the United States every year. And these incidents produce about 46 deaths and 218 serious injuries annually. So these are stark realities, I think, that, we need to make sure that we're aware of. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to put some safety and security items on the screen, and I want you to use your chat feature or unmute yourself and let me know how you would use these things. Just choose one of them, how you would use these things in order to help with the safety or security of your church. There's some Lysol, some bleach, some index cards, an empty bottle, some gloves, a wristband, some rope, and lastly, some masking tape. Now, I could have put a whole bunch more on here, but that's all I could fit on my screen. Alice is laughing because she saw me do this the other day. So in your chat or unmute yourself, how would you use one of these items to either, make your church more safe for the kids or more secure? Certainly your Lysol, right, for sanitizing. Yep, right. Absolutely. Yep, yep. Now, these two things go together. This empty bottle and bleach go together. What do you think you would use the bleach and an empty bottle for? And Alfreda's right, we could use it for sanitizing again. But one of the things that you'd use the bottle, the empty bottle and the bleach would be to make a bleach solution, right? So that you can clean the toys with. Because we need to make sure that toys are not only cleaned, but we need to make sure they're disinfected. So that's important.
Ron has responded saying the rope to wrap the door handle to keep intruders out.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that might be one way to use the rope. Okay. Now, how about another way, Alice? You knew another way. What's another way to use
Another
the rope?
way would be to group the kids together and have them hold on to the rope so that you can take them all out in a single file out of the room and they're all together. That's
right. That's right. So in the case of an emergency and you have to leave the facility, that rope would be very handy to take the children out. Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, gloves. So gloves you'd use especially when you change a diaper. So think about that when you're changing a baby's diaper. You'd have the baby on the changing table. You put the diaper underneath. You take the one diaper off, and then you put the brand new diaper there underneath. And that the old diaper, once you're done with getting the child all set with the new diaper, then you would take the old diaper in your hand and then take off your gloves, right? And wrap the, your dirty diaper in the gloves, and then you throw that away. Good diapering procedure. And then you have index cards here, and you have wristbands, and maybe you'd use those for a check-in and check-out policy, a check and check out procedure. And how about masking tape? You can space things out. I think somebody said that, space things out. The other thing to do with masking tape is you can put the child's name on the tape, and you could put that on their belongings when they come into the room, so that this is Tommy's bag, this is Tommy's bottle, so that the kids' things don't get contaminated. You can put the Tommy on the back of the back of the shirt, so you know who the children are, especially when other people come into the room. You can also write on the back of that masking tape any allergies they have, maybe put a star, you know, signifying that a child might have an allergy. So things like that. So all everyday things, you know, can help us to keep our kids safe and secure. So hopefully, you said, oh, didn't know about that. Cool. All right, so let's spend a few minutes. We're going to break down these 5 areas. Remember, the 5 areas are germs, injuries, abductions, abuse, and violent attacks. So we're going to take them one by one, and we're going to see what we need to do to get ready to make sure that we are safe and secure at our local churches.
All right, so we're going to start with germs. And germs, as we know, can be spread in a variety of ways. It could be by touching your eyes, your nose, and your mouth without washing your hands. You could be preparing food or eating food and drinks with unwashed hands. And by touching a contaminated surface or objects would be another way to spread the germs. And then, of course, by blowing your nose, coughing, sneezing into hands, and then touching other people's hands or common objects. And I know, like in a preschool room, that's a big issue with the kiddos. They run around with those runny noses and, oh, wait a minute, gotta go grab this one. And, you know, we gotta remember, okay, yeah, I've done that. I've gotta go wash my hands. So some of the best practices that we might include in would be training the volunteers and children to wash their hands. You know, you might consider practicing this as an activity at a teacher training or in the classroom. Especially after messy activities, we want to make sure that our hands are washed. And we have the CDC guideline that say to prevent the spread of germs during COVID-19 pandemic, we should wash our hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. And then use a hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol if you can't get to the soap and water. And what you do would be to wet your hands with the clean running water. It could be warm or cold. And turn off the tap, apply the soap. You're gonna lather your hands by rubbing them together with the soap. And you wanna make sure you lather the backs, between the fingers, under the nails. And you wanna scrub the hands for at least 20 seconds. Don't need a timer. We all know the happy birthday song. So you could hum the happy birthday song from the beginning twice through. And then you're gonna rinse your hands well under clean running water and then dry your hands using a clean towel or air dryer.
And I wonder, Alice, how many people really wash their hands like this?
Not many.
Not many, not many. And again, you know, this is a great way to really, you could do this at a training event with your volunteers, you know, and also with kids. If your kids haven't come back yet from COVID, or even if they have come back, you know, maybe get some basins of water and show kids how they can really wash their hands. I'll tell you, I did that with my grandsons, and every time they come over now, they want to sing the happy birthday song when they're washing their hands. I mean, if you can get the kids involved, and then you know what? They'll start saying to us, hey, adults, this is the right way. They'll correct us. So it's really a great way to make sure that we stop the spread of germs. So let me jump in and let's talk about that. After every class, you need to make sure that your whole room, including toys, are cleaned and disinfected. Now, you know, and I have both the words cleaned and disinfected on the screen. The reason I have that is there's a difference between cleaning and disinfecting. So cleaning is when we remove the dirt and the crumbs and the dust and and it does take off some of the germs. And when we do clean them, we make sure that we clean things with soap and water. And you know, take your time. This includes toys, this includes the tables, this includes the chairs, this includes your if you have like a you know, a place stove or a workbench in your children's area. If the children have played with those items, those are the types of things that you need to make sure that you wash down. Because and again, it's a two-step process, because cleaning won't necessarily remove all the germs. That's why you need to do the second step, which is what we call disinfecting. And when we disinfect, we use chemicals, and that kills the germs on the surfaces and on the objects. And some of the common disinfectants that we use are bleach. Remember, I talked about the bleach solution, and that's water. And then you put so it's a gallon of water to 1.5 teaspoons of bleach, and you put it in that spray bottle, and you can spray down the toys. You know, a couple of things that I do at my church is that at our church, we have a couple of bins right near the door. And we, after the kids have played with the blocks, or after the kids have, you know, played with even books, you know, we throw them in that bin. And at the end of the class, one of the volunteers will take that into the kitchen and wash it with soap and water, and then come back and we disinfect it. And then we leave them on a towel on top of the table in that room, and we let them air dry. And so that's the procedure that we do every single week. Because remember, you want to make sure that you have two adults, or an adult and an older teenager with you in the classroom. So you have one adult, you know, taking care of the kids, saying goodbye and all that, and then the other adult or youth can be in the kitchen taking care of the cleaning and the disinfecting. But it needs to be done every week. And I'll tell you, even at my own church, I've seen that bin still sitting there weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. And so we need to be getting into the habit of making sure that we disinfect as well as clean our toys and all the other items in the room. So as soon as a child touches something, it's something we need to be very cognizant of. Another thing, a lot of churches during COVID, they began to have special cases with all of the kids' pencils and crayons and all the supplies that a child would use for the classroom. And that's a great practice to have, because again, that's only child will use that. And then every week you can certainly wipe down the outside of the case, and only the child that belongs to that case has access to the inside. So that, again, those are the types of practices that is so important that we make sure that we do, because again, germs are prevalent, and we have to, this is a good way to combat that.
So finally, we're looking at promoting a healthy child policy. And this policy ensures that children who have been sick or who are exhibiting symptoms will not come into the classroom and spread unwanted germs. So you say, what are some of the possible guidelines that we can post for children and the parents and the staff to know? Some of the general ones is we want to make sure that if the child has had any of the following symptoms: a fever in the previous 24 hours, vomiting or diarrhea, any symptom of a childhood disease such as chickenpox or whooping cough, common cold from onset through 1 week, sore throat or ear infection, we want to make sure that they should be off the medication that they were given, any unexplained or contagious rash, head lice, pink eye, or other eye infection. You might want to consider making this part of your welcome packet that you give to the parents when they first bring their children into the children's area. And you also make sure you have this policy posted prominently in your space. Every classroom should have them.
And also we need to be reminded that, again, we're in COVID, we're getting out of COVID. And so, there may be some other protocols that we need to put in place. For those of you that live in Massachusetts, we heard tonight that the town of the Provincetown on the Cape has had a very high increase in COVID tests in their area. And so now they are mandating that masks be put in place. So we have to be prepared to shift, unexpected shifts. And, if parents feel they're more comfortable with their children wearing masks, then we need to promote that, and we need to support parents who decide that they want to make sure that their children have that extra layer of protection. And what a lot of churches are doing is they're waiting to see what the school systems are doing. So, so that might be another rule of thumb. Listen to what your schools are doing, and you may want to mirror what your public schools are doing, because that's what a lot of childcare centers are doing, and a lot of churches are doing, and other places that support children. So just be aware of that. So we've talked about germs, and so let's now shift our thoughts to injuries. And you don't want this little guy in your church to be crying because of an injury, right? So let's talk about some things that we need to be thinking about, because in order to prevent injuries, we need to be ready. Okay, we need to be ready. The church needs to be ready for any type of emergency. And these are, accidents and emergencies, we know they're bound to happen, and that it's best that we be prepared to handle a variety of different situations. And for example, it might include two kids colliding while playing a game, innocently playing a game, and, one child knocks into another child and knocks the kid's teeth out. Or another child hits the kid and knocks them out. I mean, those things happen. What happens if you're outside? Maybe a bee sting might happen, right? Maybe if you're in the classroom and a child eats something that they shouldn't be eating, maybe a child that has peanut allergy and all of a sudden wants to try, their friend's peanut butter over there because it looks good and they don't have any clue. You might have a food allergy incident or another medical event. You just don't know what event might happen. So we just need to be ready in case of any type of emergency. And so let me just say a couple of best practices that might be very important, especially when it comes to injuries. First of all, remove all the safety hazards from classrooms. That means broken toys, that means broken furniture, and other items that might cause injury to a child. Now, there's a picture right on your screen. I wonder how many of us have those types of things in our classrooms that need to be removed. Even little toys with a bunch of pieces, we might want to remove that because why? A choking hazard. That's an accident waiting to happen. So, those things do happen. So we can do some preventive maintenance, and we can remove things like that might be in our classroom. Another thing we can do to prevent is install safety plugs, door safety guards, locks, and other devices that'll prevent injury to children and volunteers. And also making sure that, again, we were telling you in the first segment, germs are going to happen. So clean and sanitize or disinfect. So you're going to have chemicals in your room, perhaps. Well, you want to make sure that those chemicals don't get into the hands of kids. So you're going to want to make sure that you have locks, or you have put them up high, or whatever you need to do. But think about, what in my classroom might be a hazard. Maybe you have a TV that's not on the wall, but on a cart. that could be a hazard for a child. So how do you make sure that that cart doesn't fall? So just little things like that that we, again, we can prevent. Yes,
Sandy,
Alice.
how do you handle the situation when you have parents who think they're being very helpful and they donate toys that their kids have outgrown?
Yep.
How do you handle a policy like that?
Yep.
What would the policy should be?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Alice, you need a policy.
That's right.
Right? You need a policy, and you have to make sure that parents know, you know, that people know your children's area is not a dumping ground, and that if they're going to leave something or they want to give something to the church, they have to ask first. And again, this may be something you can put in your bulletin, or you can, you know, put an email out to parents, especially if you have this issue, and just let them know that, you know, we're happy to take some gifts, but they really have to be in pristine shape. And things you definitely don't want are stuffed animals. Do not take any stuffed animals. They are the most germy things that you can have in your room. So don't accept anybody's stuffed animals. And Ron's laughing. I don't know why, but anyway, stuffed animals are not our friends. So please. So yeah, have a policy. And, you know, again, we don't have to be mean about it, but we need to have a policy. And the pastor needs to stand behind us. And the other leadership needs to stand behind us, because sometimes they can be the worst offenders. So anyway, hopefully not. All right. And then finally, what I would say is we got to go, and Alice said this about germs. We need to train our volunteers to know what the appropriate protocol is going to be in case of an emergency. So for example, if a child is stung by a bee while playing outside at VBS, okay, we're in VBS mode right now at our churches. And so what steps should your volunteers take, you know, in order to make sure that if that happens, what's going to happen? Well, first of all, I hope there's 2 adults, or an adult and an older youth, that are there, because you need 2 hands on deck when it comes to an emergency, because you're going to have one that may be caring for the child and making a phone call, and then the other is going to have to be making sure, you know, the other kids that are in the area are taken care of. So it's so important that we know what the protocol is. Do we know that that child that got stung by a bee is allergic? If so, then their parent needs to be called, or there need to be an EpiPen, you know, and if an EpiPen is needed, then somebody needs to be trained how to use that EpiPen, you know. And so we have to make sure we know who that person is, trained in order to use an EpiPen. So that's why, you know, it's important that we, you know things about our children. And we're going to talk about that in the next segment. So it's so important that we know all about those things. Another thing that might happen is, how about if a child ingests something that they're allergic to? You know, what's the protocol going to be? You know, and so hopefully people know that, you know, the leaders need to be called, the parents need to be called. And if there is an incident, you need to make sure that you have an incident report filled out, because if something happens and your church gets sued or there's an issue, then you need to make sure that everybody knows what happened in that incident and how you responded. So an accident report's important. And if you need an accident report, let me know and I'll help you out with that. Another emergency possible injury thing could be a fire drill, you know, and if there's a fire, you know, everybody needs to know what to do. And in the case of a fire, I always say to leaders when I'm teaching this conference is that the parents need to know that you, as a leader or a volunteer, know what to do with their children in case of a fire. And what you need to do is, there's a fire, you get that rope, right? And you make sure you take those children out of the church the proper way, because hopefully in your room, it says in case of a fire or a case of emergency, this is the door you need to go out, okay? You go out that door and you go to a meeting place. There needs to be a central meeting place where everybody knows if there's an emergency and we need to get out of this building, this is where we're going to meet. And and the people up in the sanctuary and parents need to realize that if there's a fire, they're not to come downstairs and try to get their child. They need to listen to the person who's in charge upstairs or in the other part of the building, but they need to know that you as the volunteer or leader for their children know what to do. And that's a thing that we need to communicate to them. We need to be communicating, these are the steps that we'll take. And you do that through your bulletin, you do that through announcements, you do that through what Alice talked about, your welcome packet. You know, you can give them a whole bunch of information that will help them to feel really comfortable about how you're taking care of their children. Now, 3 C's of an emergency, you know, very quickly would be, you know, check and evaluate. If there's an emergency, you know, somebody's fallen, there's a bee sting, something, check and evaluate what the issue is, and then decide, you know, do I need to call somebody? You know, do I need to call the, you know, the Sunday school director? Do I need to call the VBS director? If it's the pastor, you know, who do I need to call? Do I need to call the parent? You know, and make sure that you know what to do. And then you have to make sure that you know how to care for the child. In a lot of cases, for first aid, if you're not schooled in first aid, the only first aid you should be giving is soap and water. You know, if you're gonna clean a wound or something like that. But if a child's fallen, you have to be careful about not shifting the child. So don't try to pick the child up or do anything, because we sometimes can make it worse. So we have to be careful of how we're taking care of children. I know it's a lot, but we have to make sure that we know what we're doing. So I hope that's helpful. And be sure, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We want to be able to answer those. So everybody seems awful quiet here. All right.
All right, Sandy, thank you for all that good information. I'm sure everybody is so quiet is because they're just sopping it in like a wet sponge. So another thing we need to think about is the abductions. You know, it's a concern that parents have. You would think that in a world, it wouldn't be an issue in this day and age. There is some concern though. Have you heard of parental kidnapping? Well, this is the taking of a child by a non-custodial parent in violation of court-demanded custody agreements. It's especially true if the intent is to deprive the custodial parent. This can be too easy for a parent to do. First, the child already knows the parent and may not be alarmed. Second, the parent knows where the child is and when the other parent is not there. And then they can identify themselves as a parent. Identifying themselves as a parent gives them a cross. It gives them access to the room. So you might think, but we're a church, some will say. Good Christians won't be trying to steal children. How about the single parent who brings her boy to Sunday school? While she's in an adult class, her ex may come in, give the primary class teacher or nursery attendant a story, and then take his son to the sick grandmother. Or the custodial father drops Mary Lou off at church daycare center while he goes to work, and mom shows up, takes Mary Lou and drives to another state. In an example of stranger abductions, children are out in our play area. Joe Bummer parks on the street, walks over to the play area and talks to a child. And then that child ends up going with him to their car and they leave. These are all probable scenarios if we are not prepared. So how can we prevent abductions? As we've been saying all night long, we want to make sure we follow the 2 adult rule. As this would promote diligence. And we want to have more than one set of eyes on any situation, which will help to prevent anyone taking a child without someone noticing. We want to make sure that all our parents and guardians have completed a child information sheet so that the leaders and volunteers know who is allowed to take a child from the classroom. And we want to make sure that you have a clear and working check-in, check-out system, as this is crucial to knowing the whereabouts and needs of every child in our care.
And then, of course, as we've said before, we need to make sure we train our volunteers to know how to respond if a child is abducted or goes missing. Now, remember what Alice said about the 2-adult rule. Well, there's another component of that, which I think is important, and that's making sure that all of your volunteers are background checked. You know, that's another piece. I know Ron's going to talk a little bit about that in his, but it's so important to underscore the fact that, you know, we want to make sure that there's all sorts of eyes on our kids. And I know some of you will say, we don't have enough volunteers. Well, we need to make sure that we communicate to our church that one of the reasons that we need the volunteers is that, you know, we want to keep our kids safe and secure. And sometimes we have to be more creative with the way that we use volunteers. And maybe a person can only volunteer once a month, or maybe once every 3 months. But you know what? Take that, you know, do what you can. And hopefully when you let them volunteer a little, they'll love it so much that they'll want to volunteer some more. But it's so important that we make sure that we follow that, you know, 2-adult rule, and that we have our volunteers background checked. And when I say background checked, I'm talking about a national background check. A lot of people only do the Massachusetts. If you live in Massachusetts, we have a Corey check, which is only looks at Massachusetts court records. It does not look at anything outside of Massachusetts. And so it's so important that you do your due diligence and get a national background check. And in our church, we get them every other year. That's how important this is to the safety and security of our children. And, you know, let me tell you, folks, it only takes one incident to happen. And if that's the case, it can be devastating to a church. So it's just so important that we, you know, take this stuff seriously and train our volunteers to know what to do. What's the protocol when a child becomes missing or abducted? So we need to make sure. So if you have any questions, be sure to be putting those in the chat. And now Alice and I are going to make sure that we disappear for a bit. And we're going to turn it over to Ron Mills, and he's going to talk a little bit about, or a lot about, abuse and violent attacks.
All right, so thank you so much for all that stuff. But as one word I heard that I really like a lot, and you're gonna see that, hear that a lot from me too, is training. Training. You can't have enough of it. Sandy had mentioned that they do the background check every other year. Let me suggest that you get your teams together and you train at least every year. I like to do it in the fall with the entire teaching staff and make sure that everybody is on the same page and the protocols, that everybody knows what to do. And it's going to be important in this section that we talk here. And I'm going to talk about abuse. Let me give you a thing of what abuse is. Abuse is any behavior or action designed to control, intimidate, threaten, or injure another person. It is a misuse of power which uses the bonds of intimacy, trust, and dependency to make the victim vulnerable. Abuse can be emotional, it can be physical, financial, sexual, philosophical. I got that one mixed up, but it's not limited to any one of these. Any misuse, manipulation, or exploitation of power for the purpose of controlling the behaviors, actions, thoughts, or feelings of another person is abuse. So what is abuse? I want to talk a little bit about the symptoms of abuse and molestation. First, we have physical abuse. Now, it's often the most easily recognized form of abuse. Physical abuse can be any kind of hitting, shaking, burning, pinching, biting, the list goes on, choking, throwing, again, beating, and any other action that causes physical injury or leaves a mark or can cause pain. Now, we can see that when a student runs into our room. And believe me, churches are not exempt from this. This is why I'm going to give you just a brief scenario of every thing that I see here. So that's what physical abuse is, and we can see that right off. There's also sexual abuse, and this is any type of sexual contact between an adult and anyone younger than 18, between a significantly older child and a younger child, or if one person overpowers another, regardless of age. If a family member sexually abuses another family member, this is called abuse. So we mentioned that we can have older teenagers into the classroom. These older teenagers also have to know and be trained in these, as I call it, incident response plan, that know what to do and what to look for in all these situations. We also have emotional abuse, and it can be the most difficult to identify because there are usually no outward signs of the abuse. Emotional abuse happens when yelling and anger go too far, or when parents constantly criticize, threaten, or dismiss kids or teens, and they take their self-esteem away from them, and feelings of self-worth are damaged. Emotional abuse can hurt and cause damage just as physical abuse also does. Uh, there's a lot of training on this. We mentioned that Sandy will be sending you a booklet. There's a lot more in it. And again, you can raise your hand and ask questions as we go through this, and we'll try to do our best to answer what we can. We also have child neglect. Now, it's difficult, again, to identify and define this type of neglect. Excuse me. It occurs when a child or a teen doesn't have adequate food, housing, clothes, medical care, or supervision. Emotional neglect happens when a parent doesn't provide enough emotional support, or deliberately and constantly pays very little or no attention to a child. And this does not mean that the parent doesn't give a kid uh, their basic needs like food and shelter and love. But when taking out their cell phone and stuff like that, that's not child neglect. It means when they do not give them their food or the shelter and the love that they need. Difficult one to find, but you can look for it in the kids usually that we teach. They come to Sunday school. I know in our Sunday school atmosphere, or like Sandy had said, we're in our VBS mode. These children that come, they talk more probably than their parents would want them to talk. So those are just briefly touches on different types of abuse. So who is required to report if any of these things take place? Well, first of all, clergy members, including ordained or licensed leaders of any church or religious body, persons performing official duties on behalf of a church or a religious body, or persons employed by a religious body to supervise, educate, coach, train, or counsel a child on a regular basis. The simple truth of the matter is Who's required to report? Everyone is required to report if they see or hear some type of abuse in a child. So how do you determine if abuse or molestation has actually occurred? Maybe you just have a suspicion that a child is being abused based on something you've witnessed, or a child has told you that abuse is happening. Either way, it is your responsibility to report it to the authorities. Let me just say here, you do not have to have proof that abuse is occurring to make a report, only reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion means that you have witnessed physical or behavioral signs either in the child or the parent, caregiver, or both, or you have received a disclosure from a child about abuse, neglect, or boundary violations toward them. So it's your responsibility to report that. There is, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Let me take this one. When and where do you report? Well, mandated reporters, and that's everyone, are required to complete a written report within 48 hours of calling to report child abuse and neglect. And the written report does not replace the requirements to the first call. So you have to call DCYF, call the local police, whichever entity is there. You need to call right away, and then you have 48 hours to make a written report. And this is going to be very important as you go through the procedure, and they will guide you in the procedure of how that goes. But you need to have this written report ready. So we do have protection, though, for good faith reporting. Like I said, if you just suspect it, you need to report it. But there's a section here called good faith reporting. And the term good faith refers to the assumption that the reporter, to the best of his or her knowledge, has reason to believe that the child in question was being subjected to abuse and neglect, even if the allegations made in the report cannot be fully sustained. The reporter is still provided with immunity. So your name will not be up. The only time your name would come up in any abuse case is if it went to court. And then you would have to, of course, there would be good reasons for it to go to court. So you do have good faith reporting. And sometimes I hear that people just don't want to get involved. So they don't write down what they have to write down or call who they want to call or should call. But here we have good faith reporting, and your name is never brought up. So what do we report? As well as you can, what happened or is happening to the child, describe the nature of the abuse or neglect, and be specific as possible. After making the report, you must tell the person in charge of the organization or program, for example, a lead teacher, the Sunday school director, or the pastor. That's the second person you talk to. That person then is responsible to facilitate the organization's cooperation while any investigation is going on. And I put that in there because you need to have, like we talked about earlier in some of the stuff, you need to have a person in charge. Well, the same would have to happen here. You need to have a person in charge that could meet the media or meet the paper, whatever, the same person all the time that would be the spokesperson. How to report. Again, DCYF, I have a Massachusetts number, 617-660-3400, which would be the DCF office or online after reporting. Again, you have 48 hours to do a written report. And then I want you to be sensitive to the victim. There's a lot going on if any one of these symptoms come up, and we do have to report it in this incident response plan. I want you to be real sensitive to the victim, and don't keep around them and keep asking them all different questions. It's very difficult for a little one to go through, or anyone to go through, any of these type of abuse type of situations. So be very sensitive to the victims. It's very important. And Sandy mentioned this, violent attacks. Every classroom must have this in there, and so that usually right next to the door. So you are here, this is the evacuation route we take it for fire, for floods, for hurricane. We never know a situation. And again, we're a church, we're not exempt from all these hazards that come our way. So make sure your church has an evacuation route. And as was mentioned before, make sure that the whole church, the congregation that's sitting in the sanctuary, knows they do not come down to the Sunday school wing or wherever your children are. The teachers need to be trained in a way that they know where to go and where the meeting place is. Whether it be a big tree on the left side of the church, I like to have a sign that's planted somewhere that says evacuation spot, so that the teachers know exactly where to go, and the parents that are in the sanctuary don't go down there, but they know their kids will be safe and they can meet them up at this evacuation point. So make sure your class has this sign in their room and they know where to go. This I put in because this is on everybody's mind, active shooters. And, you know, again, we're a church. And let me just give you a few quick scenarios. A man kills 7 people, wounds 7, and kills himself at a teen service in Wedgwood Baptist Church, Fort Worth, Texas. These are things that have happened. A man opens fire at a Living Church of God service in Brookfield, Wisconsin. 8 people died, including the gunman. Now, we had just gone through another training, and usually an intruder and an active shooter scenario knows that he has between 3 and 5 minutes before response comes. So he's going to take as many people as he can. We can get I could get very involved in teaching you what to do when they come in, but we don't have time for that this evening. But you can email. Sandy will give you our information, or you can call her and we'll be glad to give you any information you want on this. But there's just a quick scenario. Lockdown is number 1. This is what we need to do right away. And again, we need to have a person that is in charge, someone that will yell out lockdown. That's all you have to do. Yell it out loud, lockdown, but somebody has to be in charge to do this. And then the teachers need to be trained on how you do that. That's why I mentioned the rope. I don't have time, but I could show you how a 6-foot piece of rope and a 95-pound woman can hold and tie down a door that nobody could get into. So all these little tricks of lockdown is kind of cool to go through. So this is usually the thing we do is first of all, if an intruder is in the building, first thing we want to do is run. First thing we want to do is lock him out if we can, or her out if we can. If that is not feasible, then we need to run, hide, and the last thing we need to do is fight. We need to have a security team, and this is where a security team in church would come into place. And we have a conference on that, how to recruit them who should be in your security team. So there's a lot there. You've heard a lot tonight, a lot of different things that went on. I hope a lot of it has been good to hear, that we just have a lot of information that we want to share in such a time. But I'm going to turn it back over to Sandy, and she's going to bring it into a close. But please ask questions. We'll do our best to answer anything that you might send our way. Sandy?
Yep. So just a reminder about a few things that Ron ran through really quickly, for sure, which is so important. And it's a good reminder that somebody does need to be in charge. And we reiterate this for injuries, we reiterate this for abductions. There does need to be somebody in charge, but when you're in your classroom, you are the one in charge.
Right.
You are the one in charge, and you may be the one that will have to say, we need to lock this down. In our church, we only have one preschool class that's in our basement, when church service is going on. That leader and volunteer, those two volunteers, hopefully, that are down there, they're the ones making the decision for those one or two kids that are in there. And so you may not have a booming voice that says, oh, it's time to lock down. So you sometimes can't wait for a booming voice to tell you what to do, because the voice might need to be yours.
That's why the training, Sandy, and all of these situations is very important, that your church at least annually goes through training, what to look for. And as far as we did training on washing your hands, you would think that would be so easy to do, but yet we really don't do it.
That's right.
So we need the training.
Yeah.
And again, who wants to know all this stuff? Who is the parents? The more we are prepared for the safety of the children, the more comfortable parents are going to feel by leaving their children in our care.
That's right. And as we wrap up, so 3 things that I want to remind you about. First of all, we need to get educated, and that's what we've been doing tonight. I hope that you feel like you've been educated. And again, I know it was like drinking from a fire hydrant, because that's exactly what it is. There's a lot of information here, a lot of education. And again, not all of these things are going to happen, but we still need to be prepared, and we need to be aware. This is where we need to make sure that we're raising awareness. We need to, say to our volunteers, you need to be aware when a child comes in, and if the child has bruises on them. And it doesn't necessarily, we don't have to jump to conclusions right away. But, if the child, continues to come in like that, if a child says something that might be a little off, again, that needs to raise awareness for us. And we don't need a business meeting to decide that we have to call the state because there's an issue.
Yeah.
You certainly want to call your Sunday school director and talk to the pastor, but there doesn't have to be. If you're concerned that there's imminent danger, you need to not hesitate, but to call and make sure you get help for that child. Because you know what? Once you've called, it's not your responsibility, because you've placed it in the hands of someone who knows how to handle those types of situations. And you have to be confident that that's what you've done. And if they decide that it's not an issue, then it's not an issue. And you know what? Your name won't be, that nobody's going to know that it was you that called. And so you just have to, sometimes raise awareness, because DCF or the state needs to know that in order sometimes to build a case against a family or someone that may be abusing or neglecting a child. So we need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, And then finally, it really is all about relationships. As we develop relationships with the kids, they're going to trust us. They're going to tell us things that, are so important as they trust us. When we have to leave the building quickly, they're going to come with us because we have built up trust. With the same thing with parents. If parents, have a good relationship with us and feel like, wow, those people in that children's area know what they're doing, they're going to feel a lot better about leaving their children with us. So it's so important to educate, to be aware, and to build relationships. And so I hope that, this has been helpful tonight.
Yes.
All right. And there will be materials that will go out. So I know somebody's going to jump off, and that's okay. So we're done actually. So we're going to keep in touch. And if you want to get a hold of me, scoelho@bcne.net is my contact information. And I will be sending out this video to you, as well as a booklet that we did about 18 months ago before COVID. We're going to update, and we'll send you out the newest version of that if you like. And then, of course, a resource sheet for this. So I just want to thank everybody for coming and being part of our time tonight. Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Alice, and thank you, everybody else. Ron, will you close us in prayer?